And welcome once again to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Glad you're with us. And Kent, what do we got today?
Well, not only are we back, but the legislature is back, and that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about a show we've titled, Look Out, the Legislature is Back. It's always that time of year when you have to kind of hold on to your chair because you don't know what's going to come out of the state capitol. But we've got a fellow here this week, Ron Cupp, a very experienced representative of the state chamber who works with the legislature that's going to tell us what's going on.
We look forward to visiting with Ron. He's with the state chamber, as Kent said, and that show will start when we get back. You're watching The Verdict.
Every day America uses clean-burning natural gas instead of coal or oil is a day of victory for our environment. That's why Chesapeake chose to explore for natural gas exclusively, and we've never looked back. Because natural gas burns twice as clean as oil or coal, and reducing carbon emissions to combat potential global warming is every bit as urgent as cutting our dependence on energy imports. As America's #1 driller of new gas wells, Chesapeake is moving fast to find untapped reserves of natural gas here at home. It's the right fuel for America's economy and the fuel for a clean air future. We just happen to be early to see it so clearly. Chesapeake, natural gas wins the day.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
Awfully pleased today to welcome to The Verdict for the first time Ron Cupp. Ron is with the state chamber, has been for 27 years, is Senior Vice President for Governmental Affairs, has been working with the state chamber, as I say, for many years, and that involves working with the legislature. He's a native of Altus, a graduate of Oklahoma State University. He has worked on many issues that are now law in the state of Oklahoma, such as right to work and two for technology campaign. He supervises upwards of 10 lobbyists for the state chamber and does an awfully nice job of that. And we're real pleased he'll come and talk to us about what's going on out at the Capitol while he's gone visiting with us. Welcome.
Thank you.
Ron, what are your duties at the state chamber?
Well, as Kent mentioned, I have charge of the legislative program, which basically is the bulk of our mission at the state chamber. We have 4 full-time registered lobbyists, including myself, and then about 6 others who we register our marketing people because they're out among the state, the people of the state, around the state, and they're talking issues. So, and Dick Rush, our president and CEO, is registered. So we have 10 registered lobbyists, but 4 full-time.
Last week we had Scott Meacham on, and he noted that there's probably going to be less money to spend in the state legislature this year. How does that affect your role at the legislature, if at all?
Well, it affects it in many ways. Many of the things that we do entail funding. For instance, we're a big supporter of the EDGE Fund, the Research and Development Fund created a couple of years ago, and of course we're trying to get more funding in that. $150 million was put into that about 3 years ago. So the budget really overshadows everything that happens. So you have some issues like work comp and things like that you know, they're not dependent upon appropriations, but a lot of the economic development incentives and tax incentives and things like that are dependent upon the budget.
With no tax cut apparent, how does that affect the money that's going to go to some of those other programs? Is there going to be enough money for the EDGE program and some of those other things?
Well, I've talked to Secretary Meacham briefly, and I said, well, how is the budget deal really? He says, well, it's not real good. I think you're right. There's probably not going to be a tax cut. Right now, we're dealing with some legislation that I think is being proposed to try to get some money for tax cuts, and it has to do with sunsetting many of the major incentives that we have for business, and actually and others, and the sales tax exemptions, and we're working on that to hopefully mitigate that so that it won't harm us economic development-wise.
Won't be any tax increase.
No, not that I know of. I don't think we're going to see any you always have fees that get tacked on because when we passed State Question 640 many years ago, one of the ways they make up for that is to increase fees.
Let me change the subject a little bit, although we'll get back to some more of what the legislature is doing. 1804, the immigration law, was passed, I guess, about a year ago, became effective about a year ago, or became effective in November, I suppose, and has generated a lot of litigation, a lot of controversy. Tell us what you can about that's within the parameters of what you're authorized to talk about.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that the State Chamber supports businesses who hire legal immigrants, and we do not support those who hire illegal immigrants. That said, we've entered into a lawsuit with the Oklahoma City Chamber, the Tulsa Chamber, the Hotel and Restaurant Association, and a couple of others that challenges parts of that law based on federal preemption issues. And by that I mean the U.S. Constitution basically gives the federal government the right and authority to regulate immigration and things that do with international trade. Also, our state constitution, you may not be aware, in Article 5, Section 48, basically affirms that belief that the federal constitution and the federal government preempts states' attempts to do that. So we entered into that about 2 weeks ago, into that lawsuit. We have not heard anything about it at this point. There's more than I cannot say now about immigration than I can say because of that litigation. I will say this, I've been telling people in some talks I've given, there's good news and bad news, and one about House Bill 1804. The good news is there's not going to be a son of 1804, from what I hear. The bad news is there's not going to be a son of 1804 because there's some changes that certainly need to be made, but what we see is that there's not a real inclination for the legislature to deal with that issue this year.
So from a I'm sorry.
What were the real world impacts of 1804? What changed, that you saw?
I think you had some parts of the bill that made businesses like policemen and would have dealt businesses an uneven hand in terms of complying with not only the state law but the federal law. There was some conflicts and there's confusion.
So I guess we're going to walk out of this legislative session with 1804 still intact unless the courts do something.
Unless the court, that's correct.
So we're not going to see the legislature tinker with it, probably.
We do not think that will be the case.
Now, your suit is on file. Are there any other suits that you're aware of pending, or is this the only attack on the 1804?
I'm not sure. There were a couple of lawsuits filed on different matters. I think before ours was filed, I'm not sure what I know there were some things thrown out of those lawsuits. I'm not sure what the status of those happens to be.
Let me change the subject again and ask there may be some of our viewers that are not familiar with the State Chamber, what its role is, whom are its members. Can you just give a 30-second overview for our viewers about the State Chamber itself?
Be happy to. State Chamber is almost 85 years old, founded in the 1920s. We are a membership-driven organization. We have about 2,000 member locations around the state representing some 400,000 employees. We have a statewide board of directors, and our mission is quite simply to make Oklahoma a state of choice for business. And most of what we do revolves around that mission statement. And our key mission in fulfilling that is to represent business and to advocate for business at the state legislature and in the Congress in Washington.
Do you anticipate any changes in tort reform in this session?
It's possible. There are bills out there dealing with tort reform, lawsuit reform as we prefer to call it. The governor, as you know, vetoed really an omnibus, a very good tort reform bill last session. We're probably going to have basically the same bill introduced, or has been introduced already this year. It'll depend. We're not giving up on that. That's a key issue for us, and as the session shakes out, we'll see what happens. But I'm not I'm not pessimistic about it. I think there's some possibility.
My memory of that bill that got vetoed was that it had some limitations on the non-economic damages.
Correct.
Would you envision that surfacing again?
That would, and those, the governor, as you know, has said that's sort of his drop-dead deal in lawsuit reform, but I expect any comprehensive tort reform, lawsuit reform bill would have that provision.
How does our tort reform or lawsuit reform current on the books right now compare with the surrounding states?
Well, as you know, Texas, and that's who we always get compared with, whether that's fair or not, passed one several years ago, and it's been very successful, particularly in the area of medical lawsuit reform, because as I understand it, they have physicians I won't say, well, not necessarily flooding into Texas, but a large number of physicians moving to Texas, wanting to get licensed in Texas, and they have a backlog. So it's been very successful down there. I'm not so sure about some of the other states, but you know, Texas is the one we compare ourselves with. And basically it was Texas that the governor based his original proposal several years ago.
Are you under the impression that physicians are moving out of Oklahoma?
I don't know that I can say that. I know there's some who are maybe choosing to retire early. There could be. My son is a first-year resident in Tulsa in family medicine. I don't, you know, some of his class came from out of state, and once they finish med school, they'll go back to where they came from. But I'm not really ready to say that for sure.
All right, we're visiting with Ron Cupp. He's with the State Chamber, and we'll be right back with more on the verdict.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
That land next door was a mess. Take more than a lawnmower to revive that land. I heard the oil and natural gas people was cleaning up old oil sites, and it wouldn't cost us a plug nickel. Oh yes, sir, it was quite a revival. The whole church showed up, want to make a playground for the kids. It sure is a blessing.
Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate. We're accountants. We do taxes, business valuations, estate planning, and consulting. And we're right here in Oklahoma, working with the owners of small and medium-sized businesses. Steve Wilsey and Stuart Meyer have the resources and the experience. Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate in Oklahoma City and Tulsa.
Welcome back to the set of the verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Our guest is Ron Cupp. He's with the State Chamber. Session is, I guess, not quite midway, but we've been going on for a little while now. What issues are going on with the Chamber out there? What's at the top of your priority list?
We have a number of issues, Nick, that we're working on, transportation being one. Roads and bridges are a big item on our agenda, have been for many, many years. Of course, the budget situation could have an impact on that. There are bills out there that would do away with the 3% trigger on revenue growth to allow the Department of Transportation to get new monies. So we're working hard with a group called TRUST, which is transportation revenues used for transportation only.
Is that Neil McCaleb's outfit?
That's Neil McCaleb's group.
What a great name.
Isn't it a great name? Yeah, it is. So we're working with them. I think there's a news conference probably going on even as we, sometime as we speak today, about that issue.
Now, what are they trying to do?
Two main things, really. One is to, 2 years ago when the highway legislation was passed giving the Department of Transportation $50 million a year in new monies. If the growth in state revenue is 3% or more, it's $50 million. If it's not, it's $17.5 million. So last year, because of a glitch in the trigger, the mechanism, they got 17.5 and not 30, even though it turned out the revenue growth was more than 3%. So we want to remove that trigger. We have a $9 billion backlog in transportation projects that we need to start chewing away at.
And we will not hit that trigger this year, will we?
It's unlikely.
Yeah.
It's unlikely. So that's a big issue. Water is another one. My background in water keeps me interested in it. I've been interested in it for many, many years. A lot of bills the last 3 or 4 years. We went through about 20 years. You know, in the 70s there was a big deal about water. We passed, the Water Board did a water plan. It was out in 1980. It's been updated a couple of times. They're in the process of a 5-year update of the Oklahoma.
Which parts of the state are in the need of the most water legislation?
Well,
Is that regional?
it's not necessarily regional because you have the water-rich area, obviously southeastern Oklahoma, northeastern Oklahoma, mainly central and western parts of the state need the water. But you have cities and towns in eastern Oklahoma that don't have the infrastructure to deliver what they need. So we need a plan that's visionary. We need a plan where we determine how much water we have, how much we're going to need in the next 50 years. And I say 50 years, that's what the Water Board uses for its estimates. When it's needed, and then we need to find a way to raise the money to build the infrastructure. And those are the 4 legs of the stool that I've been talking about for some time. And it's just, then you have all this lawsuit filed by Tarrant County, Texas. So there's a lot of things happening in water, a lot of bills introduced this year, probably 20 plus I've already reviewed.
Now, is that lawsuit to get water out of Oklahoma for North Texas?
Yes, it is.
What's the status of that? And what do you expect?
It's still in the courts right now, and I know there's been some motions filed to update certain parts of that. I'm not sure exactly where we are, but the ruling has not been issued at this point.
In fact, we're going to do a show on that very topic next week, and we're going to have Diane Petticord and Jeff Todd, I believe it is, joining us to talk about that.
2 people I know well and work with.
What else is going on?
Well, I mentioned the protection of incentives bill. Protection of incentives, the bill that we're working on. Workforce is another really, really big issue in Oklahoma, and maybe to some extent we're victims of our own hard work, because we have jobs now that are begging for qualified workers. And really there are 2 parts to this. One, you have an aging workforce, the baby boomers of my generation, who are going to be retiring in the next several years. And then you have jobs now that are just begging for workers. So we're working with a number of people. Matt Robinson on our staff has been very involved with the Department of Commerce and with some other folks to find out. In fact, we had a meeting in our office Friday with some folks from that are dealing with released prisoners. We release 8,000 prisoners a year in Oklahoma who don't have jobs. And many of them could be probably put to work in a very beneficial manner. So that's one of the things we're exploring.
Well, unemployment is fairly low.
Yes, it is.
Is there a labor shortage in the state of Oklahoma?
I would say there is.
And if someone's seeking a job, should they be able to find one? Is that your message?
I would think if you want to work in
employees?
Oklahoma, you should be able to find a job. You may not be trained, but you can be trained. And we have an excellent career technology system to do that. But yes, we have particularly in the technology areas, we have people who have recruited our state. I had a chamber executive tell me just last week of a New York company that came and camped out in his parking lot of one of his businesses, recruiting members who were on their lunch hour to go to New York. And they were willing to double their salaries right then and there.
What else are you dealing with? Is that pretty well it?
We got a number of things. You may recall we passed a bill some years ago called the Opportunity Fund. We prefer to call it a closing fund. It allows us to compete with Texas and Arkansas, Missouri, New Mexico, and others. And basically, that fund did not have much money appropriated, about $45 million. Most of that's gone. The Supreme Court ruled I believe last spring, because of the balance of the power situation, the legislature, the executive branches, and so on, that the mechanism to approve projects with that fund was not constitutional. So we're working to get that back on track.
Trying to recruit primary jobs?
Yes. Basically, it's a closing fund where if you come down, you go through the checklist of what you're offering, your incentives, and so on. You have a good tax climate, a good business climate, and then you may need a little bit to get them over the threshold. That's what it is. Oklahoma City passed a similar thing not too many months ago.
That's right.
For the city.
And we've used it once already.
Already. Well, it's a very beneficial thing to have. Education, I mentioned the Edge Fund. Education is always a big priority of ours. Of course, it takes more than half the budget if you had all the education issues together. Performance-based evaluations for teachers, performance-based pay is big on our list. And something that, Mick, that you'll like, I'm a member of the Fit Kids Coalition, and childhood obesity is a big deal for us.
Yes,
and
it
there are
is.
bills out there to get more hours of physical activity instated in the schools, and there are also a couple of bills that actually would be negative toward that, but that's something we're working on also.
That is a hot button issue. I know in the state of Texas, there's a lot of work toward, first they want to get it K to 6, and then we get it K to 8, and then
That's
they'd like
right.
to have it K through 12, where they have a mandatory physical education class every day for health and nutrition, and I know that's active. Do you think that has some legs at the legislature?
I think it does, yes I do. In fact, I believe one of the bills was up last week and another one today.
Well, I know you've had a project going on for some time at the state chamber called Insure Oklahoma. Tell us about that.
Insure Oklahoma is we call it a public-private partnership between the state and the small businesses. The money from it comes from the tobacco tax funds, tobacco trust. Basically, it says that if you're an employer of 50 or fewer employees, then you can provide health insurance to your employees, and the state will pick up 60% of the premium. You have to pick up a minimum of 25%, and the employee picks up the rest. To date, it's not been as successful as we'd like it to be. It has a great deal of opportunity attached to it, and the problem has to do with the poverty level rate to qualify for an employee, and we've got a waiver in right now to the federal government to try to get that kicked from 200% of the federal poverty level to up to 250%. But it's a program that has a lot of promise. I think there are about 1,800 businesses participating now with
Already?
somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 employees. So I think the opportunity is there.
Well, we're going to have to get out of here. Ron, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure.
All right, we'll be back
Come
with
back.
the final word right after this. You're watching The Verdict.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Our guest on today's show was Ron Cupp. He's with the state chamber. A very interesting guest. Shows the diversification of all the things that they have to deal with.
Well, they've got a broad agenda that keeps them busy all the time. I don't think there's ever a slack time, but this is a particularly busy time for Ron, and we really do appreciate him giving us time when the legislature's in session, during the day, during the week, to come out and talk to us about what's going on so our viewers will know what are the major issues the legislature's dealing with this year and what are the major issues the state chamber is addressing.
Immigration, lawsuit reform, water issues, incentive funds. It's a very interesting time to be in the business of creating business.
A vast panoply of matters.
Panoply, good word, Ken. I'll have to look that one up later. If you'd like more information on Ron and the State Chamber, you can go to their website. It's okstatechamber.com. And if you'd like more information on our show, you can go to our website, theverdict.tv. Tell us about a guest you'd like to see or a subject that you'd like to see discussed. For Kent Myers, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you next time on The Verdict.
The preceding program was produced exclusively for the Cox Channel.